So we are starting this very interesting session and trying to respect the timetable. Thank you for attending it. And first, we are going to listen to Dr. Muriel Debié's communication. She is speaking on her own behalf and also on behalf of Professor Dominique at the Sorbonne in Paris. Muriel is well known as a famous Syriacist. She is a specialist in Syriac historiography, and she teaches, as has been told, at the École Pratique Théologique in Paris. So the communication is reading the history of Rome in Syria, its origins in the Pseudo-Diocles.
As some of you may have noticed, I'm now behind the name of Dominique Chatonnet, actually Dominique who is the husband of our colleague François Chatonnet, but also happens to be a specialist of Latin literature and the history of the beginnings of Rome. And so I asked Dominique to work with me on a Syriac text, a very intriguing one, talking about the origins of Rome and the legend of Romulus and Remus, the famous twin founders of Rome, in order to understand better what interest, what new information or what interest could show about Syriac text, if any. Since I am not myself a specialist of all the legends dealing with the beginnings of Rome. So we worked together, so he did the work and I'm doing the presentation, a very comfortable situation. The text is preserved in several Syriac manuscripts and has been actually edited from two manuscripts, one manuscript from the British Library and another one belonging to Debié. So we have an edition in the CSCO of this text, which has been much forgotten and not much studied. But we have a number of other manuscripts, and especially one in the Chatonnet library in the Catholic, Syrian Catholic Patriarchate, which has a slightly different ending from the two known manuscripts. So this text is interesting because we have a number of legends coming from the classical Greek and Latin history, but somehow we worked for Byzantine audience and then a Syriac audience. And that is what I want to show you today, is how the legends about Rome actually circulated from the Greek tradition to the Syriac one, and how the Syriac changed the understanding of his story. The text is attributed to someone called Diocles, not a very well-known name. He's been recognized as Diocles, who is a Greek historian of the 2nd century BC, who wrote about the origins of Rome in Greek for a Greek audience. But we have lost everything from Diocles. We do not have this text anymore. We know that he wrote about Rome because we have a passage in Plutarch in the life of Romulus saying that Diocles was actually the model of the Latin, subsequent Latin historians. And so Diocles is supposed to be the oldest ancient historian who wrote about Romulus and the origins of Rome. But we do not have anything from him. And strangely, we have this text in Syriac attributed to Diocles. So the question is the text actually from Diocles, or is it a Pseudo-Diocles? And unfortunately, it's probably a Pseudo-Diocles. Because we know that Diocles, from Plutarch, we know that Diocles was the source of other Latin historians, and what we have in the Syriac text is very different from what we have in the Latin historians. So it cannot be Diocles. And then the text has been reworked in Byzantine times and relies heavily upon a Byzantine historian called Malalas, who wrote in the 6th century. Yet, the text shows a number of differences with what Malalas says about this history of Rome. And we will try to see his differences. So there is no chance that what we have is actually Diocles. Before the history of Rome proper, we have a small piece about how Heracles, the Greek semigod, invented the purple while he was walking along the seashores in Tyre, modern Lebanon. So we have an interest in the history of the Middle East and especially of Lebanon and Syria at the beginning of the text. Then, after the history of Rome, we have a prediction made to Augustus, the Latin emperor, about Christ and the coming of Christ. And in the Syriac manuscript of Chatonnet, we have the mention of the building, the making of a golden statue put by Augustus on the Capitol in Rome. And this statue is supposed to have been known by the Apostle Peter when he came in Rome, and Peter is supposed to have preached from the statue on the Capitol in Rome, which is of course not historical, but it's an interesting piece of information. So let me come to the history of Rome. We have in the Syriac text the mention of the fact that Romulus and Remus actually founded the city of Rome together, which is not the case in what we have in our sources, of course, because Romulus killed Remus before the founding of the city. But here in the Syriac text, both are associated in the construction of Rome, the construction of the walls of Rome, but also the fact that they put in the Capitol, on top of the Capitol, a statue. So we have here a first statue, a golden statue, put on top of the Capitol, and this statue is supposed to be the Palladium, which is the sacred statue of Athena, kept in Greece. And the Latin historians say that this Palladium was transferred from Athens to Rome by Aeneas. So it's a quite different story here, because it's Romulus and Remus who actually puts the Palladium on top of the Capitol. So that is a different story from what we have in the Latin historians, and what we have even in the Greek historians of Rome, and something that we find in Malalas, because Malalas actually made a number of innovations in the history of Rome. So here we have a Byzantine author who rewrote the history of Rome, and part of that came into the Syriac text. So in the Syriac version, as in Malalas, after the murder of Remus, the twin brother Romulus, is in a very bad situation because there are a number of earthquakes in the city. And so Romulus comes to pity in Delphi. So he goes in order to have an answer from an oracle in Greece and not in Rome, which is interesting. And there it is, the oracle says, the earthquakes will cease who will sit with you and give the laws at the same time as you. So Romulus actually makes a kind of statue of his brother Remus, and the statue sits on his side. And then the earthquake actually sits when the statue is in place, and it's a way of explaining why, in the Latin tradition, the Romans always say "we" when they promulgate a new law. "We" means Remus or his statue. Maybe I could have had a statue of Dominique on my side. It would have been a good thing to do, to have peace. And so they say "we" because of the presence of Romulus and Remus. So that comes from Malalas. But what is different from Malalas is that here the statue actually permits the earthquakes to stop, which is not the case in Malalas. And here Romulus has a very positive image, which is not the case either in Malalas. Then after that, Romulus goes to Athens, and there we have something quite interesting, because it is said that everything will be all right in Rome if Romulus gives Athens complete liberty. And that was the case during the Roman Empire. Athens was not considered as a subject to Rome, but had a kind of independence. So here again, it's very close to the historical account. But the difference is that Romulus, when in Athens, mentions the existence of Demotion Sophias. So it's the word Demotion, which is Greek, which is transliterated into Syriac. So it's a Demotion Sophias. A demotion is a public building. It can be either a library or a bath or a treasury, any kind of public building. And so here we have a mention of a public building of Sophias, which means wisdom. That is a building that we have never heard of in Athens. And what we have in Athens is a number of philosophical schools, and we know that the Emperor Marcus Aurelius actually sponsored the philosophical schools in Athens and gave a state stipend to the professors of philosophy in Athens. But we do not have a Demotion Sophias, which reminds very much of Paterigma of later times in Baghdad, but that is something unknown. And here we have a mention of a Greek philosopher. The name is really difficult to recognize in Syriac, because we have only of course, the consonants of the name. But one of our colleagues in France, Denis Fessel, actually thought that it could be Panetios, who is a very well-known Stoic philosopher, and who was the head of a Stoic Stoician philosophic school in Athens. And that made sense to have that name in that text, because Panetius is known for being a good friend of the Scipios in Rome, who were a very big family in Rome. And he came to Rome and tried to propagate the Hellenic wisdom and philosophy in Rome. So here we have again a figure which is not present in Malalas, which is only in the Syriac text, which puts the emphasis on the transfer of knowledge and philosophical knowledge from Athens to Rome. And Romulus is presented himself as a sage king, as a philosopher himself, who favored the study of philosophy. And that is something that we do not find in Malalas at all, and that is present only in that Syriac text. So that is one of the main differences short story after that of the invention by Romulus of the Brumalia, who were a very typical Roman feast, which took place at the beginning of the winter, and when people would receive each other in order to have lunch together and rejoice together. And the Syriac text puts the emphasis on the fact that Romulus actually wanted to have this feast for the people to be together and rejoice together, but also for the young people in order that they learn from that type of gathering. So we are here more in something like a Greek symposium as we have in the Platonic text, or what we know about Socrates and the young people in Athens. Something a little bit like that, but interjected in the history of the invention of the Brumalia. So we have here a quite long passage in Syriac, a bit different from what Malalas says, and especially the emphasis on the fact that it's designed for young people, and young people who learn during these symposia. Then we have a last passage about several inventions attributed to Romulus. That is something we have also in Latin text. But what is here really striking is a small piece where Romulus had a new feast in Rome, where young people would come from the top of the Capitol Hill in Rome, down the hill, on the rope, sitting on a wheel. So here it looks very much like the circus and funambulist, I don't know how to say in English, people who walk on ropes. And we know that was something very popular because we have stories about elephants walking on ropes. I cannot imagine how, but anyway. And there we have young people on wheels, and apparently the wheels are on the ropes and coming down the hill. But what is even more interesting is that these young people wear crowns, and the text says these crowns are similar to the crown that came down to Nimrod, the mighty king. And that is a reference to the biblical text, but also to the way Nimrod was understood in the Syriac tradition as the founder of many cities, including sometimes Edessa. And here, the crown worn by the young people is assimilated in a way to the crown of Nimrod. So here we have the proof that the text was rewritten and reworked in a Syriac environment and not only translated from a Greek text. Of course it was translated, and what we have, for instance, in the CSCO is the edition of two different translations of the Greek, because we can see that in a number of places we have two different Syriac words for the same Greek word, or different word from the original. And here, so the text was rewritten. So what is interesting here is that we have first an interest for the history of Rome in the Syriac churches, which is not something obvious because it was a history different from theirs. But at the same time, a history which was acculturated into the Syriac tradition, with the mention of Nimrod, for instance, and probably with the mention also of the importance of philosophy and of teaching and learning, which is something very important in the Syriac tradition, where learning and schools were so important. So here, the reworking may come not from the Greek adaptation of Diocles and of several legends of Romulus, but probably from a Syriac adaptator who made the translation from Greek, but at the same time introduced something new and something which talked to the be more interesting for a Syriac audience. The fact that the text is in several manuscripts shows that the text was considered as interesting enough to be copied until the 19th century. So it means that the history of Rome actually could be of interest to a Syriac audience. And the histories of the statues in the text, which is also something really striking, with several ones, from Romulus to the Apostle Peter in Rome, is something also quite intriguing. I don't know exactly what to make of that, but what is sure is that we have something in the text about the importance of statues and the Christianization of statues. Because at the beginning, we have a statue of Remus on the side of his brother, and at the end, we have a statue of the Virgin Mary with a child on top of the cathedral, which means the Christianization of Rome and the Christianization of the cults, because the statues were associated with pagan cults. And here, the text says, well, the statues are also something Christian, and we have in Rome a statue, Rome, which was supposed to be the center of the world for the Mediterranean cultures. We have in the center of the world in Rome a statue of the Virgin Mary. So I hope that this presentation has shown you how classical motifs from Greek historian of Rome actually circulated into the Syriac tradition in a somewhat different, with a somewhat different understanding of his origins. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Muriel, for this fascinating paper which opens our minds to so many topics. And thank you to Professor Dominique as well. I suppose there are questions.
Thank you for a fascinating talk. As to Malalas, there's one minor problem that the Malalas we have is an abbreviation of the original. So small changes might actually be just left out in the text that we have today. And there is some work being done on the sources of Malalas for those earlier periods. It's very unlikely that Malalas himself came up with new ideas of beyond for that early period. So it is probably slightly earlier than the 6th century material we have.
It's the first testimony we have.
Yeah, it's the first testimony rather than Malalas writing it all of a sudden into his text. And the other aspect, because Malalas himself is also very fond of Malalas or his source, whatever it is, of talking about statues in ways that which are a reinterpretation already of older material. And we have it in all statues of Malalas is a very good example of that. Such a thing happened already in later history, probably the 5th century.
Yes, and we can make a reference to the book of Gilbert d'Acon about the parastases of Constantinople, for instance, where we have examples of how statues were reinterpreted over time because people just didn't know what they were representing, so they were just imagining what it could be, and that is something very popular. But there are a number of changes that cannot be ascribed to Malalas. Sometimes it's just a kind of summary of Malalas, but sometimes it's quite different from what he has.
Is there another question?
Not at the moment. I have to look deeper into the translation techniques used in the text, especially since we have apparently two different translations in order to try to have an idea of the period when it was translated into Syriac. So, after the 6th century in Malalas, I can't say more than that.
So maybe I got just a little bit more. That in Malalas text, as far as I remember, Romulus and Remus, Romulus and Omas. It sounds Syriac to me. There is another occurrence of the word Omas in the Syrian inscription in the Museum of Art in Norman. What do you think about it?
Well, Malalas was a Syrian himself, so he might have access to local sources written in Greek or maybe in Syriac, I don't know. The idea would be to suggest that maybe the Syriac text had the same source as Malalas. Maybe, but I think that we have no way to be sure of that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So thank you again, Muriel, for this very brilliant film. And now we have the honor and the pleasure to listen to Dr. Kottayam.